Hey, what's up, man?
Hello, mate.
How's it all going?
Pretty good. Do you just bear that sort of thing with grim?
It's, stoicism.
I admire you.
It's just necessary for dealing with
Americans.
the dreadful oiks across the pond.
Oiks? What's that?
Yes. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's an oik.
Are you saying oink?
No, it's spelled O-I-K. Oik.
Yeah, I don't know. I know boik. I don't know oik.
It's like a yob.
What's a yob? You're just going to refuse to explain this to me, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, how's yob spelled so I can look it up? I'm just going to find the
Y-O-B.
It's a kick-ass metal band. I'm not going to Oh, okay. It actually came up first. Oh, the band and the slang came up simultaneously.
Yeah. Oik. O-I-K.
Oh, I was looking for yob. A loutish, uncultured person.
Yeah, see?
Oh, you know they made it dumber south of the equator. In New Zealand and Australia, they say yabo.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, no, because they've got to make everything sound like that, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
It can't just be a regular word. It has to have some kind of dringo, drongo.
Yeah, it's not a tin of beer, mate. It's a tinno. It's a tinny. Gonna trim the veg with my whirly-go-roundy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was the part in The Simpsons where he sees the frog and he's like, it's a frog. It's like, that's a funny name. I would have called them Chazwazzers.
It's a good bit. It's a good bit. Well, the oiks over here can unite, I think, in making fun of Australians.
I mean, everyone should be able to.
Yeah. They're the new Italians. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connery Bush, joined, as always, by Phil McKenzie. And, we got some fist fights to talk to you about today, folks. Very surprising, interesting change of pace for the Heavy Hands podcast. I know you came here expecting political commentary and incisive grappling analysis, but in fact, we're going to talk about dudes punching each other in the mouth. Phil, how you doing?
Not too bad. Looking forward to what is actually a pretty stellar card, top to bottom.
It really is, isn't it? We're talking, of course, about this upcoming UFC on ESPN card, BeyBlaydes versus Volkov. And let me just read to you some of the highlights of this lineup. Curtis Blaydes versus Alexander Volkov, of course. In the co-main, we've got Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos. Further down on the main card, we've got Lyman Good versus our boy, Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad. We are definitely going to be hitting all three of those. Other options ahead of us, Jim Miller versus Roosevelt Roberts, Clay Guida versus Bobby Green, which stands to be very weird and potentially intensely ugly. Tisha Torres, Brianna Van Buren is interesting. Frank Camacho versus Matt Frevola is a certified banger. I'm actually into Roxy Modafferi versus Lauren Murphy. I think that's a great fight. Mm-hmm. It's just a good-looking card. I mean, I guess this means that we're casuals, but it's all blue names, Phil. That's really what it seems to come down to at the end of the day. We're also going to talk about last week's action, which was, I don't know, I guess most people get very, very hyped when a bunch of fights end immediately, which happened throughout the very early portion of the card, and everyone was getting very excited. The small cage and some sort of mismatches, let's be real, were causing people to just get absolutely deaded. But there were some decent fights on the main card. We're going to talk about Philia versus Rodin. We were interested in Rosa versus Aguilar, but I don't know if we're going to want to talk about it. Marvin Vettori absolutely outclassed Carl Roberson. And then I guess we're going to talk about the main event, Cynthia Calvillo versus Jessica Ai. So all of that's coming at the very tail end. We're going to try to cram it all into about 2 minutes of discussion just before cutting out. But we're going to start off with our previews. Curtis Blaydes versus Alexander Volkov at the top of a very compelling card, to be honest. Very, very strong for a fight night card, even without these current circumstances, I think. So, Phil, interesting heavyweight fight. Should create some momentum in this division. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, these guys both don't really have anywhere else to go at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
They can't fight for the title because Cormier and Stipe have been dancing around it for a while. Ngannou is definitely next. So this is about the next best thing you can do with the heavyweight division at the moment, is to just try and keep it running for whenever, anyone will actually get their shot at the belt.
Yep.
I mean, I guess Derrick Lewis is also out there as well.
Sure.
Although he's not on a great win streak. But, yeah, so these are two actually genuinely fairly interesting heavyweights to watch. It's a fight that I'm actually looking forward to seeing. They're both pretty much in their prime.
Two of the more...
Not something that...
Please, go on.
Not something you can actually often say for heavyweight main events.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a rough matchup for Alexander Volkov.
Yeah, I just want to say two of the more like sort of technically refined guys in this whole division, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see them trying to be good.
Yes.
And I actually genuinely value that a lot, even if it doesn't always work.
Give the heavyweight division the Bart Simpson cake. You tried. All right, good job, guys. 3 of you tried. Yeah, I think you already said it's a bad matchup for Alexander Volkov. That's the thing. These two guys are technically proficient. They have functional games. Curtis Blaydes' game just kind of seems perfectly designed to counter that of Volkov. And there are a couple of things, that Volkov has going for him that most Blaydes opponents don't. I think we should maybe bolster his case by mentioning those first. He's really tall and has really long limbs. Curtis Blaydes, still not a great striker. He's made strides, but still very wooden is always the word I want to use to describe Curtis Blaydes in the feet. He's got this really sort of awkward, herky-jerky rhythm. Each move is kind of like fully committed to, and then he kind of has to make another decision after that. There's not a lot of flow, is what I'm saying, to Curtis Blaydes in the feet. Again, we've seen that improve. We have seen Blaydes with, to me, look, if you have any element of the strongest indicator of even the tiniest element of flow is can you throw a 1-1-2? It's like the king of flowy boxing combinations. You're playing with your jab. You're using it to set up the right hand. It's a very simple but very tricky combination. Curtis Blaydes can occasionally throw a 1-1-2. So I will give him that credit. But otherwise, we have definitely seen him picked apart and frequently stunned by larger and or more technical kickboxing opponents. So that's something. There's also Volkov.
When we saw the Junior Dos Santos fight, this was kind of mixed marks for Blaydes, because on the one hand, he didn't really get hit or hurt at all over the course of about 2 rounds. On the other hand, a lot of real ugly entries which didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
He did spend a lot of time trying to track down someone who is not known for their cagecraft.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a great look. I don't know that Volkov's cagecraft is really that much better.
Oh, no.
Than Dos Santos's. We are, again, whatever technical praise I heap on these men does have a lot to do with their context, but he's easier to take down. That is absolutely true. Junior Dos Santos has always had some pretty ironclad takedown defense. And in fact, without those Cain Velasquez fights, his statistics would be... Well, even those Cain Velasquez fights bolstered his statistics, because truly he stuffed most of Cain's takedowns in both fights. That's not the case for Volkov. He's faced a lot fewer wrestlers, and that is the difficulty for guys in Volkov's position, is that there just aren't that many good ones at heavyweight. But notably, he was taken down twice in the first round by Fabricio Verdum. Same shot, same takedown both times. That head outside single that Verdum likes. He was largely controlled against the cage, and I think taken down a few times by Czech Congo. And he was swept and beaten up before being knocked out back in the day by Vitaly Minikov in Bellator. And these are all guys that seem like, you know, Curtis Blaydes is a better takedown artist than any of them.
I think that is definitely fair to say.
Mm-hmm. So let me say the one thing that struck me watching footage of these two fighters is that the takedown game is obviously a big advantage for Blaydes, but I really think it's his mat wrestling and his top game that are going to be the sort of the undoing of Volkov, because you know, this could be, I could have put this as like another advantage for Volkov. He's got long limbs. He does have some submissions on his record. A couple of triangles, I think. Actually, no, just a rear naked choke. Yeah. He goes for triangles. He has yet to, he has one. Denis Smolderev. So, you know, it can be an irritating thing for people to deal with. But I think Volkov's fight with Verdum gives us a really good example to go off of, because while Verdum was able to get Volkov down early, before ultimately just being outpaced by him, something that seems to happen in basically every Verdum fight when he's not actually invested in training. Cardio is the first thing to go for that guy. He got Volkov down, and he wanted to posture. He wanted to stand. This is sort of can you think of any examples of Verdum playing like a low, controlling top game? He kind of likes a sort of dynamic, scrambly passing game when he's on top, in my recollection.
I'm trying to think what the Nogueira ground exchanges look like, because that might have been one of the only times where he but I honestly can't remember. For some reason I'm thinking that they might look different in that, but
he did hit an armbar from the top, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, certainly in the Volkov fight, Verdum went in there, he got Volkov on his back, and then he wanted to posture. He went for like a can opener to try to open his guard, because Volkov is a big believer still in the closed guard. This is heavyweight. It's 2006. Welcome. MMA is going to be the biggest sport in the world. And yeah, it basically allowed Volkov to escape. Volkov has long limbs, which are very useful if given the space to work. He also has what BJJ Scout, the great grappling analyst, would call a trapping guard. You know, if somebody sort of raises up over him and delivers a steady diet of strikes, Volkov is going to look to trap a limb. He's going to time the rhythm of that sort of continuous assault and look to transition to the triangle or look to create a sweep, especially if his opponent stands and continues striking. He'll hit like a tripod sweep from that position. And that can be great against people who fight like Verdum. I think a great counter to that, though, a counter to what is basically a counter style, a style that relies on countering top position strikers, is a really like low, patient, heavy top game. And that's what Curtis Blaydes does really well. He doesn't posture up and give the bottom player lots of opportunities to time his striking. He doesn't allow his balance to be upset so that he can land a few good strikes. He's going to stay in control, probably just wear on you with sheer pressure, and then slowly, periodically, he will build up and land a few devastatingly hard strikes before returning to his strong position. And I think that's kind of just poison, honestly, for Volkov's ground game. Like, I think that sounds like a recipe for not only Volkov getting taken down in this fight, but ultimately getting TKO'd on his back. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's one of those kind of... he's got a tall man guard, and if I think of how we've seen that kind of approach get dismantled. I think a notable one is Blaydes' now teammate, Alistair Overeem, against Stefan Struve. Because a lot of people have always been fairly complimentary of Struve's ground game because he's picked up a bunch of submissions and he's fairly adept at sweeping from bottom. But Overeem showed very little willingness to pass at all in that fight. He just stayed in guard the entire time.
Yep.
And I mean, he did admittedly posture up a bit, but he never tried to pass Struve's knees. He never gave him any opportunity to sweep. He was just said, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to rack up points on you until he got the finish. And I think Blaydes does that. I mean, okay, Volkov is definitely a lot tougher than Struve, but Blaydes also does that kind of thing a lot better than Overeem.
Yes. Yeah, he absolutely does. And, I don't know, another example maybe like Carlos Condit versus like Johnny Hendricks. Well, Carlos Condit versus anyone who ever successfully out-wrestled him. You know, GSP. There were a lot of, even for GSP, it was not a very postured, striking performance on the ground. It was a lot of just low control and just like, well, he's gone closed guard. He's agreed to stay on his back. So like, if you just play it safe and pick your spots, you've won the round in which you took him down. Yeah, it just seems like an eminently repeatable process for Curtis Blaydes to work through. And yeah, Volkov is very tough. He's typically pretty well conditioned, but I think...
Oh, yeah, remarkably so, yeah.
Yeah, but I think so is Curtis Blaydes by heavyweight standards, and Curtis Blaydes is going to be on top. So, yep, that's the pick. It's still interesting. Blaydes is always a little shaky, but... don't really have much trouble going for him in this one. So why don't we take a break after an unusually short first segment, owing to just having a very simple main event to break down. We're going to come back after this and talk about Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos, which is fascinating. We're going to talk about Lyman Good versus Bilal. Remember the name Muhammad, don't you forget it. And whatever else we can squeeze in as well after this break.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back, everyone, to Heavy Hands. We are moving down the UFC Blaydes versus Volkov main card. And in the co-main event slot, a featherweight fight, this one actually taking place, at least according to Wikipedia, at the featherweight limit. Becoming more unusual in this day and age to see contenders fighting in their given divisions with the short notice, such short notice that these fights are being thrown together with. Phil, do you hate Josh Emmett? Is it you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I hate Josh Emmett.
I was trying to remember which one of my curmudgeonly MMA friends despises Josh Emmett for reasons they can't quite explain. Shevchenko-esque reasons, shall we say. What's your deal with Josh Emmett?
He's just a weird-looking guy. But, like, normally I like weird-looking people, but he's just offensive. Like, just like, you shouldn't look like Nosferatu, but bricked up. It's not right.
He looks like a Falmer.
It's like he should be fighting Blade at the end of Blade 2.
God help him if Shane Burgos comes in with a syringe that turns Josh Emmett into a bloated CGI monster before blowing him up.
It's Blade 1.
All right. I saw all three in theaters. All right. I want you to know that. They just sort of blend together after a while. I remember Ryan Reynolds in the third one. And this was the first moment I started to despise him, actually. He doesn't look weird, by the way. But I think he said something juggling thunder cunt I believe, which is a very
Oh,
much
dear.
like an epic bacon guy plus swears kind of insult, which seems to
It
be
really is.
seems to be the Ryan Reynolds brand.
Chuck Wendig type writing there.
Yeah, fuck Wendig. It's the harder version of Chuck Wendig. So yeah. What the fuck are we talking about? Oh yeah, featherweight contenders. Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos. Well, your hatred for Josh Emmett aside, I mean, you can't deny he has a certain Pat Wyman quality about him. A certain ability to not always know exactly what he's doing, but still win fights by being freakishly athletic. You can't take that away from him, Phil.
He is a plus athlete.
He is definitely a plus athlete. Where is Tom Elliott, goddammit? I mean, I don't know. What do you make of this matchup? Shane Burgos back on a 3-fight win streak after that loss to Calvin Kattar. But I also sort of feel like I haven't seen a lot of development out of Shane Burgos. Like I'm getting the feeling he's 29. I'm getting the feeling he might just be kind of the guy he is at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, because he has, and this is one of the reasons why this is such a scary proposition for him.
Yeah.
Is that he just has an inherently high risk style. And I don't know, I mean, he hasn't been fighting for very long, right? I mean,
No.
What are we talking, 6-7 years now?
Since
I mean,
2013.
Yeah. I mean, he really hadn't been fighting for very long once he came to the UFC.
Yep.
And he's trying to fight one of the sort of most like games which must have so many pieces working together, kind of veterans approaches, that it gets him into trouble all the time.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why it's so great to watch Shane Burgos.
Right.
Because you can see him trying to, integrate parries and head movement and footwork, and he's trying to make this incredibly aggressive game work while still, defending shots. But the problem is that that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And it gets him into trouble a lot. Which makes this, as I said, like a really scary fight. Because he just goes out there from the beginning. He doesn't particularly, he doesn't have a style that allows him to build reads. He doesn't have a defensive approach that he goes out with from the beginning. He always hangs his head out there to bait shots. He always tries to counter right from the beginning. And he's been vulnerable multiple times to people who have thrown away one shot and then just clocked him with the second whilst he's coming to return,
Yeah.
most, notably against Calvin Kattar, obviously, but also Kurt Hollabaugh.
Yeah.
And as such, you just got to be like, okay, alternatively, he's up against Josh Emmett, who is willing to just wait around the entire time for one big combination burst.
Right.
I mean, you see him getting dropped against Hollabaugh. It's him getting clobbered by 2 hooks in the pocket, which is incredibly Emmett stuff. And, he was able to beat Cub Swanson, but Cub Swanson, one of the things about him is that his power has just eroded in recent years.
Yeah.
He hasn't finished anyone for ages. He was almost a perfect matchup for Burgos to have, like, a good learning experience against without ever really getting put in trouble.
And it was still a very close fight.
Mm-hmm.
It was not. Yeah, it was largely owing, I think, to Swanson's jab, as I recall, which Emmett does not have in the same measure. But, yeah, he certainly ate enough Cub Swanson right hands and left hooks that you have to wonder about this one. Which is what's frustrating, because it kind of looks like a matchup where Shane Burgos is going to get the fight he wants, because I just think Emmett tends to allow people to have the fight they want. He's, like you said, he's pretty patient. I mean, he can be quite frenetic as well, but if somebody is like coming out looking insistent on pressuring him or whatever, he'll kind of just wait for his moments. He'll mix in the occasional reactive shot. I don't think he's hit a ton of them in the UFC, but it's something in his back pocket that should further complicate Burgos' job of reading the counters coming back at him as he's pressing forward. I don't know. Like, I think the thing is, I think Shane Burgos could be a fighter who gets more reads. Like, I don't think that's out of possibility for him. I think he could be a more insistent jabber. I think he could go to the body even more. Like, I think that he should be viewing that as just an excellent option whenever he gets someone to back up or react to any threat to their head, is just to plug them in the ribs. Alternatively, like backing people off and following them with kicks to disrupt them, and like these things that would create more of a flow, I think, for Shane Burgos as a pressuring, aggressive, counterpunching type. But for the time being, like, I just think he kind of gets, I just think he sort of enjoys, like, hanging his chin out there and seeing if he can make the other guy miss. I think he enjoys getting into exchanges. I just think he likes to fight a little too much. And Calvin Kattar clearly didn't knock it out of him. And no one else has been able to knock him out since. Am I picking a Josh Emmett knockout?
I don't want to, though.
I know you don't want to. I had no question about that. I'm grappling with my own feelings here, Phil.
Okay, so there is one thing which gives me pause to an extent. And that is that I don't think Emmett likes people who aren't scared of him.
That is an interesting thought. He didn't like
because
Jeremy
I think
Stevens.
He does. Yeah, I think he does want and need room to blitz in. That he wants, he wants to suddenly, he wants to spend a while getting someone's timing down, and then suddenly blitz in and clobber them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he, and most of the people that he's fought have notably been sort of slow-paced mid-range guys, right? Mirsad Bektic, Ricardo Lamas. These are not pace and pressure fighters
Right.
under their ideal working conditions. They don't want to do that. If he is backing up, Burgos is a tremendously diverse attacker, as you said. I mean, he might do those things more, but he still does them a lot. He plays off the jab and the low kick a lot. He's a great body snatcher. He's a good combination puncher. I don't know if Emmett's going to enjoy being pushed into the cage by Shane Burgos.
Yeah, probably not.
He didn't enjoy it against Jeremy Stevens.
No. He didn't enjoy Michael Johnson's pressure either, but he just deaded Michael Johnson with one shot in the third round.
Yeah, I think Michael Johnson is probably... he does seem to some extent to have a bit of the Cub Swanson analogy there, in that he's crafty, but he's not the finishing threat that he used to be.
Sure.
I mean, particularly not at featherweight. He just didn't seem to be hurting people at all.
Yeah.
I think that Emmett will be is a much, much more of a risk of just getting hurt by Burgos if he tries to run his regular game.
Yeah. How big a puncher is Burgos, though?
He's pretty big. I mean,
respectable, but
he's finished quite a lot of people.
Certainly. I'm in a lot of these early submissions club and subs. Because I don't know, Kurt Hollowball, he got knocked down and hit a submission from his back. He couldn't knock out Cub Swanson, which is not nothing. Cub Swanson survived that 3-round war with Doo-Ho Choi, but this is also Cub Swanson after 3 losses and immediately following a fight in which he was knocked down with a jab by Renato Moicano. But
yeah, that's true.
Granted, he did eat some fucking leather from Chrome Gracie in that next fight. So, I mean, I think, Swanson's durability is probably still okay. It's probably not a knock on him. I don't know. I see Burgos as more of a slow cooker. It's really the pressure and the attrition that sets people up, and he doesn't tend to fade. He stays very sharp with his combinations, so he just starts to catch people more and more unawares with the variety of his attack and the relentlessness of his attack as the fight carries on. I don't know. Like, how much like Scott Holtzman does that make Shane Burgos? You know what I mean?
I mean, mostly the people that make it to a decision with him tend to be pretty badly fucked up.
Yeah.
He's, as you said, like, rips people to the body, tends to beat them up to the legs. He's a big attritional fighter.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Pick Shane Burgos, Phil. I know you have to.
I'm going to. I'm not picking fucking Josh Emmett.
Yep. Go on. Oh, that's it? That's
yes.
Okay. You bit
I'm going to
back
pick
your
him
bond.
by knockout because it'll be cool.
Okay. Okay. That's what this show has become. I'm going to pick Josh Emmett by knockout because it'll suck.
Yeah, that is the 2020 pick. It's worked out so well for me, like, so far. Whenever I've decided to make that the 2020 suck pick, it's really, like, gone well for me, and I'm abandoning it now against my best interests.
You still have the cancer called hope within your breast, and you will pay for it when Josh Emmett knocks Shane Burgos out 3 seconds before the end of the third round.
God damn it!
So I mean, you know, however you feel about the given fighters, that's a fantastic fight. Very, very interesting.
It is. I mean, I don't like Josh Emmett, but he is a unique fighter that I do actually want to see, like, fighting other people. He's a very he's a special threat.
Yes,
just one I really hate.
And whether or not he's exciting can be sort of matchup dependent. But in Shane Burgos, he has one of the most consistently exciting people on the entire roster. So I am quite assured there will be some goddamn exchanges in this one. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about, I actually overlooked it before. As a sort of like, which of these two dogs should we lead out behind the barn sort of fight, Raquel Pennington versus Marion Reneau is actually pretty interesting to me. But we're going to jump right over it and go ahead and talk about Lyman Good, Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad. And I don't know, Phil. I feel like some people might forget the name after this one. That's sort of my thought coming in.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one.
Yeah.
Just because I think there's it's just a real athleticism golf fight.
Yeah.
Lyman Good hasn't always been the best wrestler, and Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, is a dogged and willing and, like, functional wrestler, but really, like, Chance for Encounter couldn't get much done against Good at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much better Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, is than him at pure wrestling.
Yeah, right. The commentators were talking a lot. I mean, I just rewatched that fight, and as far as I recall, Rencounter only got in on one takedown attempt. And the commentators were talking about how they wanted more takedowns. They wanted more takedowns. But what it came down to is that Rencounter couldn't close the distance, even despite being the guy with the longer arms. If you're going to hesitate on, like, the fringes of Good's range, if you're going to let him get his range before you do, which is what happened in that fight, like, one of the clearest examples I can remember watching recently of one person in the fight just having a really easy time landing their jabs and lead right hands and body shots, and the other person having longer arms but still just missing them constantly. It was a real, what's the classic example? What's that Matt Riddle fight? Sean Pearson?
Sean Pearson, yeah.
It was a real that kind of vibe. And Bilal Muhammad doesn't even have the reach. So, however, their wrestling games might actually compare. The fact of the matter is that good striking was accurate and powerful enough to keep Rencounter from ever entering a distance where he could think about wrestling. And once he was stuck at long range, it was a perfect fight for Good, because this guy who's super explosive, he is always liable to suffer the curse of Joe Rogan, to exhaust himself getting into exchanges that he can't maintain. but it allowed him to fight at this really easy, measured pace where Rencounter wasn't, it was a little iffy about closing the distance to each time he wanted to try. Good was able to sit there and feint and pop him with the jab, and every once in a while he had to lay down on a combination, sit down on a combo and back Rencounter off. But it was a very sort of Jose Aldo performance, shall we say, from Lyman Good. And I think that dynamic is more or less the same here. Which sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few things which are worth considering, which is obviously Muhammad is a much better striker than Rencounter. I mean, as he proved when they fought.
Yes.
Also, able to beat basically Tim Means in a pure stand-up fight when that really meant something.
Mm-hmm.
He is a good striker, but he is not an elite striker, and he is not a fast or particularly dangerous one.
Yeah.
I think his main weapon here, I mean, you pretty much mentioned it, is pace.
Yep.
Because there's certainly a possibility that he can do to Lyman Good what Zaleski dos Santos did.
Yeah.
And that he can just be there and keep coming for him and be that indefatigable that Good is just like, no, you know what? I don't really want to be here with this guy anymore. I just can't put him away.
But what
doesn't have the... Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was that?
No, please go on.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't obviously have like the power or the athleticism of Dos Santos, but he does have, I would argue, a more functional game.
Yeah, and we have seen him win fights on like sheer pressure, forcing people back, raking their legs with kicks, and tying them up in the clinch, and even when he doesn't get takedowns, just wearing on them in that range. My question was, which you just hit upon, was what's the thing that you and I always recollect from Lyman Good's fight with Zaleski dos Santos?
That he was whooping his ass before?
It was the moment in the corner before the third round where what are their names? The brothers? Why am I forgetting them? Schulman?
Yeah.
The Schulman bros are in the corner. Tiger and Liger, and they're saying to Lyman, they're like, what's wrong? You're not fighting the way you want to fight. What's wrong? And Lyman Good says the words that you never, ever want to hear from your fighter, which is, I don't want to get knocked out. I've had that moment engraved in my brain ever since I first saw it. I always think of it. And that, to me, is the question is Lyman Good going to lose to Bilal Muhammad if he is landing the harder shots throughout the fight simply because he's outpaced? Or does he kind of have to be scared out of exchanges to be broken in that way? Because he's going to get tired. That's pretty much guaranteed. But it wasn't really exhaustion that did him in against Dos Santos. It was a combination of the fact that Zaleski could just eat his hardest shots and keep coming forward, with the fact that Zaleski is a huge puncher who was swinging like a goddamn maniac and putting his shots together and just forcing Good back and willingly exchanging with him. And I think that would not be a good idea. Tough as our boy Muhammad is, I think that would be a pretty risky approach given the differences between him and Dos Santos. So I don't know. I'm going to pick Lyman Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that Muhammad is really much better when he's pressuring.
Yes.
Neil was able to force him back a lot. And he just doesn't have the sort of depth in his striking toolkit when he's not able to kind of force people back and play off the right hand and the low kick, which is primarily his weapon. So if Good is able to just keep moments of pressure, like keep significant enough pressure like Neil did, I do think he probably should be able to win the decision. But it's one of those ones where I would, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd be very happy to see Bilal Muhammad win it, because he did, he was able to out wrestle Neil at points, but it was just that Neil was able to get back up whenever he got him down. Do I trust Good to be able to do the same thing?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I do. I think it's a fascinating matchup, but yeah, I'm gonna pick. Yeah, I'm gonna pick Lyman Good. He's big. He's even bigger than Neil, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He's really powerful. He's a very good striker.
Yep.
It just takes a very specific matchup to deal with him.
Yep. That's how I'm feeling as well. There's also the fact that Good, as we saw in the Rencounter fight, like I think Rencounter also thought, kicks will lead to my pressure because I can hit him from range and back him up a few steps, and Good just outkicked him. Like he's a Tiger Schulman fighter. Like he can throw a super powerful low kick. He's not going to be discouraged from that kind of fight either. In fact, I think he likes that better than someone who is just relentlessly pressuring him. If he can stick you at kicking range, make you think about firing at that range. Yeah, it just seems like a rough one. The path to victory is clear, but it is undeniably a gritty and bloody one for Bilal Muhammad. So, Lyman Good is the pick, and with that, we will end segment 2. There are other fights from this card to be covered. I think we're going to talk about some of them now and chop those out into a bonus episode. So if you want to hear us cover anything else from this Blaydes versus Volkov card, which, as I already mentioned at the top of the show, is very strong for a fight night event, then you should go pay us $3 a month and listen to that on our Patreon. We'll be back after this to talk about... You know what it is. We'll be back.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now, finally, the moment all of you have been waiting for. It's time to talk about the greatest 5-round heavyweight war ever to take place in the women's flyweight division. I was joking on Twitter.
At a catch weight.
I forgot. I was joking on Twitter. I posted an exchange from this fight, and I had more. I had more I could have said, but I felt kind of mean. I just posted an exchange in GIF form, and I was like, wow, great heavyweight action. No, I'm sorry. I'm being told these are actually bantamweights. I was wrong. These are actually bantamweights underwater. Hold on. I'm being told there was no water. And I was planning also to go on with further tweets and say, well, fortunately, this is the sort of action that comes after 4 rounds of hard fighting. Excuse me. I'm being passed a note, which tells me that this is the first round. It was not good. It was not good to watch. But Jessica, I didn't win. So I don't know. We were wrong.
Yes. There is that salvation.
I noticed you don't seem eager. You don't seem eager to analyze this fight, Phil. You haven't really jumped in with your contributions on how this one played out.
You know what?
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was a good fight from Cynthia Calvillo.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, she did what she had to. We said, we'd been talking about how her wrestling had degraded, and she hit, really key counter takedowns. Mm-hmm. She'd obviously really trained shooting takedowns to low kicks. She got I down pretty much every time she threw a silly raw low kick, and Jessica I, being Jessica I, kept throwing them.
Yep.
She was throwing, she had takedowns underneath overcommitted strikes. It was what you would want to see from Calvillo, apart from, any of the things that would make you want to see her in future. Like finishing ability or dynamism or anything interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, she really, it really, I think, laid bare how much of the hype around Calvillo when she first came to the UFC. The feeling of her being like a dynamic, dangerous fighter was really entirely on the ground. Mm-hmm. This was one of those fights. We see, unfortunately, a high number of them in the worse women's divisions. One of those fights where the two fighters just keep having... I'm not saying this is something that is innate to female fighters. Like women's strawweight is just a deeper, better division. It's just that women's flyweight and women's bantamweight are essentially the light heavyweight and heavyweight, men's light heavyweight and heavyweight of women's MMA. But it was one of those where you just see two fighters having the same exchange over and over. Like they just sort of walk forward.
Yeah.
They just sort of edge into range. They have the exchange. It's the only one they know how to have. And the person who wins most of them wins the fight. With the added difference that Calvillo, like you said, like Andre Philia on the undercard, she had some very well-considered takedowns that probably kept Ai from ever getting into the fight. But on the other side of that coin, like Jessica Ai looked so bad.
So bad.
She looked so bad.
Yeah, it was the 5th round, I think, which was the one where she was either like 3-1 down or just 4 straight rounds down.
Yeah.
And she just went out there and Calvillo was visibly gassed.
Yeah.
And I still looked all right. And then she went out and just did exactly the same thing. And it was one of those things that would make you incredibly upset if you were at all invested in the fighter who was like out there. But also just sort of sent me into a vague depressive haze when I thought, like, how much has Jessica Ai ever changed?
No, that was my point last week, is that she didn't change at all. It's just being slightly bigger made all the difference. She's never changed.
But I mean, more that just every one of her fights just pootles on at exactly the same level of like pace and aggression.
Yeah.
And it never goes up and it never goes down and nothing will change it. It's sort of like Gleison Tibau, but without any of the cool, funny things that I liked about Gleison Tibau. She's just a spirit level.
Yeah, what if Gleison Tibau was like a dick too? You know? What if you just heard one word of his mouth and you were like, I would never invite this person to a party? Yeah, I mean, I'll say that like when Ai's game works, it works. And in that 5th round you mentioned, like she was having more success with her jab because Calvillo was tired and doing a worse job than previously of closing the distance. But it was mostly the same. The problem was that it was the same, and it was at a point where Jessica Ai desperately needed to do something different. She's just like the fencing jab just hadn't gotten the job done, and not only did she not adjust it along the way, she just stuck with it for the most part. I don't know, man. I felt her footwork was so bad in this fight. Like Calvillo's is not great; it's a lot more concept than like specific mechanics for her. But she has some of the concepts. She will like move off on an angle after an exchange. She will keep an opponent resetting by circling on the outside. It should have been a good thing that Ai's mostly had her feet in the middle of the octagon the entire time. But instead it was just like, I don't know, it was like a turret in like a video game, which just like turns exactly 25 degrees and then fires a shot that you can very easily time once you've seen it happen, and then just keeps doing that. And it doesn't adjust. I don't know. Pretty bad look for the entire division, really. And I guess now they're going to feed Cynthia Calvillo to Valentina Shevchenko, which will be funny. Okay. I think that's enough on the main event. Some people complained that we spent so long talking about it, just kvetching about it on last week's episode. But that's part of the appeal for me. Like you have to accept the inherent dumbness of MMA, I think, to really like it long enough. So
and if people want a podcast that's that doesn't kvetch about any of this kind of stuff,
mm-hmm.
I would recommend Jack Slack's Fights Gone By.
Yeah,
because he never talks shit about fights like this. He's just a respectful martial artist at heart.
He's not snarky. You know, he's one of the good English people, Phil. Not like you. He doesn't have that that famed dry acid wit, you know, or he does, but he keeps it behind his teeth. He's just very respectful and nice. All right. Well, that's the main event. It sucked. It sucked so bad. Let's talk about the co-main. Marvin Vettori. I think the story of this was what I was interested in coming in. Is Marvin Vettori getting better, and in what way? And I don't know. Do you have any read on that based on this performance?
Honestly, I feel like Marvin Vettori's been getting pretty better in pretty much every way.
Yeah.
It's really fun to see. Apart from he still seems like a very weird guy.
Yes.
But I mean, he's shown much improved striking, and in this fight he showed directionality and focus. He realized that he couldn't just hang around on the outside with Robeson and just pushed him up against the cage and took him down and neutralized his grappling and tapped him out. Mm-hmm. And it was he's really coming into a fairly special contender, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he feels very middleweight RDA.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, he's a King's MMA guy. The mechanics are very similar. And in the same way, RDA's game changed when he moved to Perillo in a different way than lifelong Cordero fighters' games tend to develop. Cordero's guys don't tend to get more complex. Really. They just sort of get more rock solid. And the big thing with Cordero has always been confidence. He's really, really good at instilling confidence in his fighters in the corner, something I've always admired about him. I know he has a credo basically about never giving negative advice. He never tells his fighters, unless he really has to. He rarely tells his fighters what not to do. He tells them what's working and how to keep it working. He's very positive, always giving you a path to victory, rather than highlighting the sort of the edges where you might fall off if you go wrong. And yeah, Vettori's been developing in that way. That's why I think it's not been super easy for me to put my finger on what's been getting better about him. But from the moment he came out and flashed a feint and threw a hard, fast, straight left down the middle and cracked Roberson on the chin, and I think this was shortly before the takedown, I was like, oh, this is the same guy who fought Israel Adesanya, except this version, might do better against that same Adesanya. Probably would. This one seems just more confident, more willing to be aggressive, and really, put steam on the shots that he knows are going to land. And he's always been a really suffocating top player on the ground. I think the vast majority of his wins actually are submissions. Yeah, vast majority of his finishes anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that was basically, he was pretty much just a grappler when he came to the UFC.
Who was the guy who submitted Polaris? I thought it was Vettori for a second. Wasn't there a guy in Venator who guillotined Polaris?
Might be.
Hold on, I'm pausing in the middle. This is professional production happening right here, folks. You were listening to two of the greatest in the podcasting world. Oh, it was Emil Webermeck. That's right.
He did not submit.
No, he knocked him out. I just remembered someone going to the ground and quickly finishing Pajares in Venator. Rest in peace, Venator. We miss you and your amazing CEO. Okay, well, Marvin Vettori looking good against Carl Roberson, who basically just seems like Roberson may still have some potential to get better, but for the time being, he's kind of just an IQ test for other rising fighters like Vettori. He's got a lot of things that make him really dangerous, but he's also just... I mean, I'll say this. Roberson actually made a lot of right calls in the grappling exchanges that ended this fight. It was sort of like Hannah Cyphers having the right read on how to get out of the knee bar from Mackenzie Dern and just not being quick enough. That they were decisions made rather than impulses felt in a sort of a flowing state. They were a little too deliberate. And I think that's what we saw. As Roberson actually managed to sweep Vettori at one point. Oh, he did a fucking crazy move, actually.
Yes. You mean when he was getting guillotined?
Yeah.
He jumped off the cage.
Yeah. He climbed up the cage and just jumped off of it, and just created enough of a scramble that he could end up on top. But Vettori is a more experienced grappler, and therefore when his back hit the ground, he was immediately working to base up and get back in on a reshot. And Roberson I think we see that his game is getting better and deeper, but it's just not natural enough for him yet. It's not instinctive. So Vettori just had an edge. What else from here? Well, I think the highlight of maybe the whole card, barring the few immediate knockouts that happened in the prelims, was Andre Fili versus Charles Jourdain. Was that fair enough?
Yep, I think we called it as being such on the way in. I mean, before, this was before Borg versus Dvalishvili was cancelled.
Oh, yeah. RIP. Yeah, I mean, Fili, Jourdain, good fight. I think, can I just come out and say, I scouted Charles Jourdain for this fight? So I studied him very in depth, watched many of his fights very closely, took lots of notes, and entered it pretty nervous, because I think Jourdain he's just a very dangerous fighter. He's in fact kind of the most dangerous breed of fighter for a longtime contender or a divisional a divisional staple like Andre Fili, because despite an impressive win over Du Ho Choi, I think the Korean Superboy kind of had lost a good bit of heat by the time Jourdain beat him. It still sort of feels like people came into this card not knowing who Charles Jourdain was. And that's a rough proposition. I think Jimmy Smith, maybe on this show back in the day, said, I think he was talking about Jake Shields and said the worst thing to be as a fighter is, this actually doesn't apply. He said the worst thing to be as a fighter was to be dangerous but not exciting. Jourdain is a similar proposition, which is that he's dangerous but unknown. So beating him doesn't really get you any cred. But as we saw, he was more than capable of beating Andre Fili.
Yeah, I mean, he's... As I think I said after the fight, this had bizarro Condit Campman vibes to it. With, one guy who's able to work behind the jab a bit more, who has a bit more of a functional game, and the other guy who is just trying to break him down with endless insane nuttiness. Kind of flurries and diversity and, attacking the legs and the body and so on. And yeah, this was a good, smart performance from Andre Fili.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with the decision at all. I know some people did, but I thought it was a relatively clean 29-28.
Yeah, I thought so too. I could see an argument for it going the other way. It was close, but
and yeah, I think, and this was once Fili remembered how to fight, because all that stuff about that Felder was calling in the early going of this fight, where he was saying, I think Fili's arm might be hurt. I don't know what he's. I mean, this was basically him reacting to Fili being remarkably passive. And I think that was something I mentioned before the fight. I don't think Fili really doesn't like pure aggression. It's been he's let people that he shouldn't, like Godofredo Pepe and Yair Rodriguez, set up insane offense on him when he really, really should have known better.
Yeah.
And this was a lot like that, in that he just kind of went out there in the early going against Jourdain, was just like, oh yeah, let's see what you got. And Jourdain was just threw the kitchen sink at him for a while.
Yep.
Until he got knocked down, and then was like, oh yeah, I know what I need to do now. I need to start punching this guy. Because up until that point, Fili just seemed to be content to just throw in the right high kick and wait.
Yeah.
But then once he started letting his hands go, once he started letting the takedowns go, it really changed the tenor of the fight.
Yeah, I think he got dropped in the first round trying to exchange in the pocket. I think it was the corner advice. I think it was Kieran Fitzgibbons, his coach at CSA, in the corner, who was like really admonishing Philia to get on his jab, to stay on pressuring with his reach. And so even though he continued to eat a lot of the low kicks that Jourdain loves to throw, he was also eating them while hitting Jourdain with the jab a lot through the second and third rounds. The jab was a really big weapon for him. I don't know. I think the interesting thing about like having actually like taken part in whatever very small way in a fighter's preparation is the perspective it gives me. It always gives me on making fight predictions in general, because like it's really hard to call fights in this fucking sport. It's just very tricky, and I think like this experience just sort of underscores that truth for me, because I feel like I had a very clear picture of the dynamic in this fight. I feel like I had a very clear picture of the winning strategy for Andre Philia. And a lot of those things panned out. It being Andre Philia, who himself said after the fight he doesn't like to have a game plan. I think like sort of like a Donald Cerrone, the coach sort of has to like hide the game plan inside his food. You know what I mean? Has to give it to him like giving a dog a pill.
Yep.
The game plan is just borne out by whatever repetitions his coach has him do in the gym. It's not something Philia thinks about very consciously. So, you know, he's a wild man. He's not always going to stick to what he should be doing. He's going to get into dangerous exchanges. What I'm trying to say is that watching this fight really reinforced the feeling that I knew this matchup very well. I understood it as close to perfectly as I ever really get. And yet, it was so close to slipping away from Andre Philia. You know what I mean? If he had just if his coach hadn't told him, quit getting into those mid-distance exchanges after the first round, after which he still got into several of them, if he had just gotten into 2 or 3 more of those trades, maybe he would have gotten finished. Jourdain's a respectable puncher.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just would have lost the second round.
Yeah, he just needed to, Jourdain just needed to land one cleaner shot enough to visibly stagger Philia in the second round, and who knows what would have happened.
Probably Jourdain would have won. And, so good fight. Sort of I think what will be seen as like an underrated win for Andre Philia, but it was a tough opponent. And on the flip side, Charles Jourdain is 24 years old. This was just his 13th pro fight. I am very much looking forward to seeing him in future as a featherweight. I think we're I'm not gonna say guaranteed, but we're likely looking at like a fringe contender, if not better, because this is a guy, as a friend of the show, Sriram Muralidharan, whose name I was really shamed when Tom Elliott came on and said it so smoothly, and realized how badly I've been butchering it every time. But Sriram on Twitter said that Jourdain's last 2 rounds in this fight were an exercise in using all of the right like feints and footwork to get into position, and then throwing it away by going fucking bananas with huge bombs. And that's sort of, Jourdain is sort of he's a little schizophrenic stylistically. He has both of those fighters in him, and you see both at different points in basically every fight. But I think it won't take that much more refinement to get a really tricky, striking finisher out of Charles Jourdain. So, good shit.
I mean, I think it's gonna be tough for him.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, there isn't a lot of like craft in his punching form. He is, and as Sriram said, I mean, he's just a crafty, cunning, and completely fearless BeyBlade. Like, he just gets into range and then just starts spinning like a top and whirling and looking for nutty shit.
Yes. This is a guy who will throw 5 flying knees over the course of a single fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think we're also seeing, like, there are significant physical edges that he's not going to, like, I don't think he's going to pass by. I think he's going to end up being like a Mac Desi for this division, because he's not a big featherweight, We saw against Philia.
Philia is a pretty big featherweight, though, especially now. That man has packed on some muscle.
Yeah, he's big, but he's also been out. He's lost the physical battle in every way against someone at some point.
Sure.
Dennis Bermudez was stronger than him. Michael Johnson was faster than him.
Sadiq Yusuf was more
Holloway
powerful.
had better cardio than him.
Yeah.
He has nothing stand out about him, and we've seen him enough that we know this now. He's just a solid physical fighter.
He's one of the more exciting split decision machines, but there is a reason that he has recently been against top flight competition, a split decision machine.
Yeah. So I think for someone like Jourdain, whilst he's going to be able to shock people, particularly if they're sort of somewhat one-note bangers like Korean Superboy,
right?
The top-tier prospects coming through this division are people like Yusuf or Burgos, who would it's hard to see a path forward for him against people like that.
You could never envision Jourdain beating Burgos?
I think it would be really tough for him.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, unless he completely shocked him with a spinning shot out of nowhere, but I think it would be equally as likely that Burgos would clobber him.
Sure. Well, I'm a little more hopeful for Jourdain. On the one hand, he's very young, but also maybe this is probably some bias. This is me I'm Jane Goodall falling in love with the gorillas over here. I watched his fight with a guy named TJ Laramie. This was his 6th pro fight in TKO, which is a Canadian promotion that produces some good talent. And it was one of those incredibly tedious dominations where Laramie just hit an easy takedown on him and sat in his guard the entire time. And immediately after that, Jourdain's game was different. He had a far more aggressive ground game, super aggressive trapping guard, ability to chain some submissions together. But more importantly, he had gotten it into his head that when the submission didn't lock on in the first 30 seconds, he was going to just hip heist and stand up or create a risky scramble, even exposing his back is something he does a lot, and run to the fence and get back to a fight he can win. That showed a pretty rapid development in response to something that had troubled him. I think now he's lost the same way to both Desmond Green and Andre Fili. It does definitely suggest a problem that he's going to continue to face, but he's also been a guy who has made significant adaptations to that problem. I also wouldn't be surprised to see him fill out a bit. Again, he's 24 years old, has good hand speed, has good power, is a really nice, smooth kicker. I just want to see where it goes from here for Jourdain. I'm certainly I'm invested. So
yeah, I mean he is always going to be incredibly fun to watch.
Yes,
he is a natural action fighter who I think is probably, if his takedown, I mean, I don't think he has the takedown defense to be an 100% guaranteed action fighter, because I think he still could be controlled, as we've seen in this fight. The takedowns came reasonably easily when Fili went for them.
Something Fili's very good at. And granted, he didn't have an easy time just holding Jourdain down, but yeah.
Against anyone but really devoted wrestlers, I think he is a guaranteed action matchup.
100%. All right, well, I think that's basically it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I versus Calvillo provided a lot of quick knockouts and then a lot of sort of decisions, but in the middle there was Philly Jourdain, and I think that made it all worth it. Next week's card is looking extremely enticing, so we hope you will come back to join us on next week's episode of this show, where we will be recapping it and also looking forward to a less intriguing card, but with a very interesting main event, Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. And it's not a terrible card, I guess.
I think it's decent, but yeah, it's a step down.
I feel like I like it. Well, I just remembered who Sean Woodson is. I have now become more interested. That guy had a really impressive UFC debut. So yeah, there's stuff to care about there. We'll be talking about that and this upcoming BeyBlaydes versus Volkov card next week. If you're not already, you should check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. Just $3 a month, folks. It's a very small amount of money, and it gets you access to all of our bonus episodes, including the one that we should have by now just put up, an extended preview of the Blaydes versus Volkov undercard. You can find that and lots of other stuff over there on our Patreon page. And Phil, gonna guess that there's nothing coming out this week.
There is not.
Me neither. So this is it for your Rebush McKenzie fix. Heavy hands will have to do for the time being. But if you want to yell at us about that, you should do so on Twitter. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And I guess that's it. Thank you all so much once again for listening. We'll talk to you next week. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.